All right, let's jump right in. Welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be looking at CybersecurityHQ's daily report for November 3rd, 2024. Specifically, we're going to focus on two major stories that really stood out to me as really impactful for security professionals. First up, SaaS misconfigurations. These things are like ticking time bombs. And then we'll talk about the Quad 7 botnet, which is spreading like wildfire. And specifically, how it's hitting Microsoft 365 accounts with just relentless password attacks. So to help us unpack all of this, we've got an expert in the field joining us today.
Hi, glad to be here.
Great. Let's start with this whole SaaS misconfiguration problem. Seems like every week there's a new breach that you can trace back to some kind of misconfiguration.
Yeah, it's a problem that just won't go away. We're talking about basic security oversights. It's like leaving your front door wide open and then being shocked when someone walks in and steals your TV.
Exactly. And CybersecurityHQ, they put out a stat that over 80% of companies have at least one SaaS misconfiguration. Just lurking out there, they probably don't even know about it.
And that's just what we know about. A lot of companies don't even realize how many they have, which makes them incredibly vulnerable.
Yeah, the 2024 Summer Olympics cyber attack, that's a perfect example of how these little errors can have massive consequences.
Absolutely. We saw the Iranian group ASA, or they're also known as Pot and Sandstorm. They used these vulnerabilities to spread propaganda, and they were using AI-generated content that was so believable. This was a very sophisticated attack.
And the crazy thing is, the tools they use to do it, they're readily available. Like Remedy AI and VoiceMod. Anyone can make deepfakes now. It's getting scary how easy it is to launch these sophisticated attacks.
Definitely, the barrier to entry is so much lower now. Attackers don't need a ton of resources or technical expertise to pull off something big.
Which brings us to our second big story, the Quad 7 botnet. It's also known as Covert Network 1658. It's growing incredibly fast, and it's all about stealing credentials, especially from Microsoft 365 accounts.
Yeah, this isn't just some random botnet. We're talking about a coordinated effort by a Chinese group called Storm 0940. They're very good at covering their tracks, and their technical skills are top-notch.
The report says they've already compromised over 8,000 devices, and almost 80% of their activity is focused on password spray attacks.
So basically, they're just hammering away at accounts with common passwords. It just shows how important strong passwords and multi-factor authentication are. If you're not using MFA, you're asking for trouble.
Right. And the report links their success to all those exposed Git configurations out there. They found over 10,000 private repositories with credentials just sitting out in the open.
It's like a treasure trove for these attackers. They can get access to sensitive code and data, and they can use that to move around inside a network. It could be way worse than just one app getting compromised. It could be your whole network. It's a good reminder that security isn't just about having a strong firewall anymore. It's about understanding how all these systems connect and how one little compromise can have a ripple effect across the whole network.
So with all these vulnerabilities floating around, what are some of the most common SaaS misconfigurations that companies need to watch out for?
Well, one big one is giving too much power to your help desk admins. It might seem like a small thing, but it can be a huge attack vector. Think about the MGM Resorts breach back in 23. They got in through a help desk account that had way too much access, and from there, they were able to move laterally and steal tons of data.
Yeah, that's a good reminder that one misconfigured account could be all it takes.
For sure. Another critical one is not using multi-factor authentication for your super admin accounts. Those accounts are basically the keys to the kingdom. If someone gets in there without MFA, it's pretty much game over for your security.
So MFA for super admins, that's non-negotiable. What else should we be looking at?
Oh, another big one is not blocking those old authentication protocols, like POP, IMP, and SMTP. They don't support MFA, which makes them prime targets for brute force attacks.
And those brute force attacks are becoming more and more common, right?
Yeah, they've increased by like 50% in just the last 2 years.
50%. Wow. So why are those legacy protocols so vulnerable to brute force?
Well, they just lack the security features of modern authentication. It's like using a basic padlock on your front door instead of a high-tech security system.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So disabling those old protocols should be a top priority.
Definitely. And then there's the whole issue of managing your super admin accounts. Too many, and you're increasing your attack surface, but too few, and it can slow down your operations.
It's a tough balance to find.
It is. And don't forget about Google Groups permissions. People often overlook those, but if they're misconfigured, it can lead to some serious data leaks, like accidentally giving unauthorized people access to sensitive documents.
Sounds like there's a lot to keep track of, especially for companies with big IT environments and limited security staff. So what can teams do to handle all this?
Well, the good news is there are tools out there that can help. SaaS security platforms like Wing Security are starting to integrate with CyS's Scuba framework.
Can you explain what that is for people who aren't familiar?
Sure, Scuba stands for Security Configuration Baseline for Applications. It's a set of best practices from CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. It helps companies establish a strong baseline for their SaaS security.
So Wing Security is using this framework to provide even more protection.
Exactly. These platforms offer real-time monitoring, compliance tracking, and they can even automatically fix critical misconfigurations. It's like having a virtual security consultant looking over your shoulder.
That sounds really helpful, especially for teams that are already stretched thin. So we've got the tools, but what else can organizations do to proactively secure their SaaS?
Regular security assessments are key. Ideally, you should be doing them quarterly to stay on top of the latest threats. But you'd be surprised how many companies aren't doing them at all. Only about 32% have a solid SaaS security program.
That's a scary low number considering all the risks we've talked about.
Hmm.
What can we do to get that number up?
Well, one way is to use risk-based prioritization tools. They help you focus on the most critical issues first, so you can address the biggest risks right away.
That makes a lot of sense,
Yeah.
especially for those teams that are juggling a million things at once.
For sure, for sure. And we can't forget about the people, the human element. Even with all the fancy tech in the world, human error is still a huge factor in these incidents. So employee training is absolutely crucial for preventing social engineering attacks. That's like 85% of SaaS breaches.
85%.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you've got the best tech, you're still vulnerable if your employees aren't trained to spot those phishing scams, those suspicious links and all those other social engineering tricks.
Exactly. You got to educate your people about the latest threats, how to stay safe online. They got to know about things like Light Spy, for example.
That iOS spyware that's making a comeback.
Right. It can do some serious damage now. Steal data, even take control of devices. This is why you need regular system updates, good endpoint protection, and some really good threat detection tools that can find and stop malware like Light Spy.
This is a multi-pronged approach, right? Tech processes and people all working together to build a truly secure SaaS environment.
Yeah, that's the idea. It's not just about checking boxes. You got to create a culture of security awareness across the whole organization. Security is everyone's job, not just IT's.
That's a great point. Well, this deep dive has been really eye-opening. We've really gone beyond the headlines today. We've looked at the real-world impact of SaaS misconfigurations and the growing threat of sophisticated attacks like what we see with the Quad 7 botnet.
And the key takeaway here, SaaS security is not something you can just set and forget. It needs constant attention, proactive measures, a commitment to always improving.
The good news is we have the tools and the knowledge to do it right. Companies have the resources to protect themselves, but they need to act before it's too late.
Don't wait for a breach to happen. Be proactive, stay vigilant, keep learning about the threats out there.
That's great advice. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your expertise.
Happy to do it.
And to all our listeners out there, thanks for tuning in. Make sure to check out CybersecurityHQ for more info on everything we talked about today. Stay safe, everyone.